To begin, we're going to look at four statements and do some word association. We're going to ask what the speaker is referring to when he or she uses the word culture. First, I want to go to India really just for the culture. We think about what culture means here. Culture could mean, certain traditions, certain experiences, perhaps certain sports or, music in India or food that is native to India. If we move down to the second one in green there, when I became principal in 2017, changing the school's culture was the first priority. What does culture mean here? Well, when I hear that statement, I think to myself, there must be some type of problem, or at least in 2017, when this principal came on board, not everything must have been to his or her liking, right? I mean, you don't make a comment like that if you show up for your first day on the job as principal and you're just, enamored and so impressed by the way everything is being done. Clearly, there were some type of problems that this principal took notice of. Maybe there was issues with student behavior. Maybe you had students who were, bullying other students who were too competitive with other students. Maybe you had students who were chronically late or chronically absent. Perhaps you had faculty members, staff members, teachers, administrators who were chronically late or absent. So when I hear the word culture there in reference to the principal taking over in 2017, I think of maybe issues with behavior, issues with attitudes, issues with maybe people's treatment of others. If we move down to the next statement, we see there is no place like the museum. There is so much culture. Well, of course, this statement is going to kind of, the meaning of culture in this statement is going to come back to what exact, what kind of museum we're talking about. It might be an art museum, it might be a science museum, it might be a museum of military history, so on and so forth. But when we talk about culture in reference to museums, we're probably referring to artifacts and artifacts from different time periods, right? From, the 1500s all the way up to the 18 and 1900s, all the way up to, right now in the 21st century. These artifacts they collect, they accumulate over time. They all kind of add up, and we will talk about that shortly. Lastly, hope this doesn't hit close to home for anyone. I need a man with a sense of culture. With Dylan, it's just always the same thing. Watch football, and when football isn't on Netflix. In this statement, it seems that culture refers to a sense of sophistication or perhaps a sense of enlightenment. This speaker says that she would prefer a man who is a little bit more well-rounded, we might say, than Dylan is. With Dylan, it's perhaps a little bit too predictable, right? He's watching football or he's watching Netflix. Sounds like this speaker wants to be with a man who is knowledgeable about more things, maybe more willing to try new things, step out of his comfort zone, as the saying goes. So culture in that sense can mean a sense of sophistication, a willingness to do new things, or maybe a knowledge about a wide variety of subject areas. The reason why I did this to begin, the reason why I want to go over these different meanings of the word culture is that the word culture can mean different things depending on the context. We hear this word a lot. We hear the word culture in sports. A coach talks about, well, I needed to, implement a new culture. We needed to cultivate a new culture. You'll hear about workplace culture. You'll hear about the culture, certainly, of other nation states or the culture of certain ethnic groups. We hear about culture a lot. Let's make sure right here that we understand some of the characteristics of what culture is, and then shortly we will define what culture is. For one, culture is shared. Culture is a collective property, we might say. What does that mean? Well, culture belongs to the group. Culture is a group property. Culture is not something that belongs to the individual. I, Will Brierton, cannot say that I have my own culture that is unique to me. No, I belong to a culture. I belong to cultures, with an S at the end, plural. I might participate in the elements of certain cultures. I might dabble in the elements of certain other cultures, but I do not have my own culture that only I have. No, culture is shared. It belongs to the group. It's a group property. Culture is also adaptive. That means it adapts to things. What types of things does culture adapt to? Well, it adapts to technological changes. Think about how our communication has changed due to the proliferation of smartphones, the ability to text people. The acronym like WYA, standing for where you at. 30, 40, 50 years ago, nobody would know what WYA means. But the way we communicate, that aspect of our culture, has changed as a result of technology. Culture adapts to wars. Culture adapts to political movements. Culture adapts to infrastructure. I went to graduate school in Louisiana. The culture of Louisiana is understood to have become much less insular, much more open to outsiders, people who are not from Louisiana, as a result of the construction of a roadway system throughout the 1920s and early 1930s. Prior to the construction of that roadway system, many residents of Louisiana, especially the more rural areas, I'm not necessarily talking about New Orleans or Baton Rouge or Shreveport, but residents of the more rural communities in Louisiana didn't have many contact with people who were not from those communities. Reason why? Well, it was too difficult to get to those communities. They did not have a roadway system to connect the various communities in that state. So culture adapts to infrastructure, it adapts to technology, it adapts to political movements. Culture adapts. As a result of that, culture is fluid, meaning it does not stay the same. It's not static. Culture changes, it evolves. We can think about differences in the way we dress. We can think about changes over time to the way we interact with others, changes in the way we maybe date or mate, right? Culture evolves, it changes over time. Culture is also cumulative. You've probably heard that word cumulative in the context of your classes in school, right? You might hear of a cumulative exam, or you might be asked to complete a cumulative project. If something is cumulative, that means the material accumulates, it builds up or it adds up. So a cumulative exam, therefore, is going to be an exam that tests you on all the material that has built up or accumulated. Culture works the same way. Cultural elements accumulate. Think about, say, uh, Apple Music or Spotify. We have the entire history of recorded music at our fingertips. We can find music that was recorded and released, a century ago, maybe even earlier than that. Or we can find, new releases or songs, albums that just came out, say, last Friday. All this music has accumulated, right? Think about a library. We can find books, journals, magazines that came out maybe a week ago or within the last month. And we can also find various publications from, say, a century ago or 2 centuries ago. All these elements of culture accumulate, they add up. Culture is also material and non-material. What I mean by that is we can distinguish between material and non-material elements of culture. Material elements of culture are going to be those that are identifiable on the basis of our 5 senses. We can see these things, we can touch these things, we can smell or taste these things in the case of food. Architecture is material culture. Uh, Clothing is material culture. Food is material culture. Musical instruments, these are going to be material elements of culture. But then we also have non-material elements of culture. These are going to be things like behaviors, norms, values, people's aspirations and goals. We'll talk more about those in another lecture, but we can divide the culture between material and non-material elements. Culture can be defined, as you see, as the way of life of a group of people. That's a short and sweet definition that you can probably memorize. A more technical definition is going to be the totality of learned, socially transmitted customs, knowledge, material objects, and behavior in a given society. Society, I should mention, can be defined as a group of people who share a culture and inhabit, I should say, they live in a shared distinguishable community. Now, community can get tricky there, right? We might have a community that's defined on the basis of geographic boundaries, like a subdivision or a municipality, or we can have, say, an online community or a community of people who get together because of some interests that they share. Yeah, community can mean some different things. I understand that, but when we talk about society, we're talking, generally speaking, about a group of people who share a culture and inhabit or live within a shared distinguishable community.